The chair by the window was always mine by default, not by choice. At every family dinner, every holiday, every gathering where my mother set the table like she was hosting a magazine shoot, I ended up in the corner seat, the one with the wobbly leg, the one closest to the kitchen noise, the one nobody else wanted. I used to think that was just coincidence. By the time I was 26, I understood it wasn't. My name is Claire. I'm the older daughter, though you'd never guess it from the way my family talked about me. My younger brother Derek was the golden one. Sharp, athletic, studying pre-law at a state school our parents paid for in full. My younger sister Amanda was the favorite daughter, the pretty one, the one my mother pointed to when her friends asked how her kids were doing. And then there was me, the one who wanted to open a bakery instead of going to grad school. The one who, according to my mother, had no realistic plan. She wasn't entirely wrong in the beginning. But she wasn't as right as she thought she was either. I grew up in a small town outside Knoxville, Tennessee. My father, a quiet man who fixed HVAC systems for 30 years, had bought a piece of land about 12 miles from our house when I was a teenager. 7 acres. Mostly woods, some flat clearing, a creek running through the east end. He paid cash for it over time, a little every month, the way he did everything, slowly and without fanfare. My mother thought it was a waste. She wanted a vacation property somewhere with a pool, somewhere she could talk about at her book club. 7 acres of Tennessee scrubland with no structure on it was not that. My father never argued with her about it. He just kept paying for it, kept the deed in a folder in his desk drawer, and occasionally drove out there on Saturday mornings to walk around. Sometimes he took me. I was the only one who ever wanted to go. I remember standing at the edge of the clearing when I was 16, watching the tree line, listening to the creek. My father stood next to me and didn't say anything for a long time. Then he said, "Some things look like nothing until you know what to do with them." I didn't know what he meant then. I was 16. I thought he was being philosophical. I didn't realize he was talking about me. When I was 24, I told my parents I wanted to open a bakery. The silence that followed was the kind that has texture. My mother set down her fork. My father looked at the table. Amanda, who was home from her junior year of college, glanced up from her phone and then back down, already uninterested. "A bakery," my mother repeated. "Yes. There's a commercial space opening up on Millbrook Avenue. The rent is manageable if I..." "Claire." She said my name the way she said it when I was 12 and had tracked mud through the living room. "You have a business degree you're not using. You have student loans. And you want to open a bakery." "People open businesses," I said. "People with capital open businesses. People who saved money. People who have a plan." She looked at my father. He was still looking at the table. "We're not in a position to fund a hobby." I hadn't asked them to fund anything. I hadn't said a single word about money. But that was the conversation my mother had decided we were having. And once she decided something, that was the conversation you were having. I took out a small business loan, $22,000, from a local credit union, and I opened the bakery myself. It was called Hollow Hill. I chose the name because of the land, because of the creek, because of something I couldn't fully explain yet. My father came in on the first morning with a $20 bill and ordered a coffee and a cinnamon roll and ate it standing at the counter and told me it was the best thing he'd ever tasted. I think about that morning a lot. The bakery lasted 14 months. I'm not going to pretend it failed because of bad luck or the economy or anything poetic like that. It failed because I underpriced everything, because I didn't understand labor costs, because I hired a part-time employee I couldn't afford and kept her on 2 months longer than I should have, because I liked her and couldn't face the conversation. It failed because I was 24, and I didn't know what I didn't know. The equipment loan defaulted. The credit union came for the commercial mixer, the proofing racks, the display case I'd custom ordered and been so proud of. I closed the door on a Tuesday in November and sat in the empty space for about an hour before I could make myself get up and leave. I moved back in with my parents at 25. My mother didn't say, "I told you so." She did something worse. She said nothing. She treated my return like a natural consequence. Like gravity? Like obviously this was what happened when you didn't listen. She talked about Amanda's internship at the PR firm in Nashville the way some people talk about the weather. Constantly, casually, like it was just the backdrop of our lives. She started adding a pause before she answered when her friends asked how her older daughter was doing. I took a job at a property management company doing administrative work. I drove a truck I bought used before the bakery. A 9 Ford Ranger that needed the rear passenger window held up with a piece of cardboard through the winter. I paid down the loan. I kept my head down. I tried not to take up too much space in my parents' house, which was hard because I felt like I was disappearing into the walls. About 8 months into living at home, my mother sat me down at the kitchen table and told me she and my father had made a decision. They were going to give Amanda $85,000 to help her buy a condo in Nashville. Amanda was 23, had a good job, had a boyfriend my mother approved of, and was, by all appearances, building the life my mother had wanted for both of us. That's wonderful, I said. I meant it. I wasn't jealous of Amanda's success. I was proud of her even then. We want to make sure you know, my mother said in the tone she used when she was preparing for defensiveness, that this isn't about playing favorites. Amanda has a plan. She has stability. This is an investment in her future. Okay, I said. When you have a plan, a real plan, we can talk about what support might look like. She said it like she was offering me something. Like the conditional promise of future help, dangled like a carrot, was generosity. I nodded. I went back to my room. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the carpet for a while. Then I called my father. He was in the garage, which is where he went when he needed to think. I heard him pick up after 2 rings. Dad, I said, can I ask you something? Yeah, he said. Can I ask you something? Yeah, he said. Is the land still yours? A pause, not a long one. Yeah, why? Can I use it? I want to try something. Another pause. Then come out here Saturday. Let's walk it. We walked the 7 acres on a cold Saturday in February. The ground was hard. The creek was running fast. The clearing was full of dead winter grass that crunched under our boots. I had a notepad. I'd spent 2 weeks reading everything I could about market gardening. Small-scale, high-density vegetable production. Not a farm exactly. Something between a farm and a garden. A system. I talked for about 20 minutes while we walked. My father listened without interrupting, which was the most respectful thing anyone had done for me in months. When I finished, he looked out over the clearing and said, "What do you need?" "Time," I said, "and access. I'll pay you rent once I'm making money." "You don't need to pay me rent," he said. "I need to pay you rent," he said. "I need to pay you rent," I said. "Otherwise, it's not real." He thought about that. $50 a month, he said. "We'll call it a lease." Deal. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. A hand-drawn map of the property lines, something he made years ago. He handed it to me without ceremony. "It's better land than it looks," he said. "The creek keeps the east field draining clean. That clearing gets good sun from the south. You'll need to test the soil." "I know," I said. "I know you know," he said. And we walked back to his truck. That was the last real conversation I had with my father about the land while he was healthy. I won't compress the next 2 years into something tidy, because it wasn't tidy. It was the hardest physical work I have ever done in my life. I was driving 45 minutes each way from my parents' house to the land every day I wasn't at my property management job. I built 2 raised bed systems by hand, post by post, using lumber I bought from a salvage yard in Maryville. I tested the soil, amended it with compost I made in a secondhand tumbler I'd found on Facebook Marketplace for $30. I planted in successions: salad greens, radishes, herbs, baby carrots, things that turned over fast and sold well at farmers markets. I applied for a vendor spot at the North Shore Farmers Market in Knoxville and was rejected the first time. I applied again 6 months later with a better application in a photo portfolio and got in. My mother asked once, in passing, what I was doing with my weekends. I told her I was working on a project. She didn't ask follow-up questions. The first Saturday I sold at the market, I made $214. I drove home with an empty truck bed and cried the whole way, not from sadness, but from something I didn't have a name for yet. Relief, maybe. Or proof. I'd made something from nothing, and someone had paid me real money for it, and the earth I'd worked with my own hands had produced it. I don't know how to explain what that feels like if you haven't felt it. By the end of the first full growing season, I had a waiting list for a small CSA, community-supported agriculture boxes, that I was delivering to 12 families in West Knoxville on Saturday afternoons. By the second season, it was 31 families. I hired my first part-time helper, a retired teacher named Mr. Kowalski, who lived near the property and wanted something to do. I paid him properly this time. I understood labor costs now. I moved out of my parents' house 17 months after I'd moved back in. I rented a small apartment in Maryville, 20 minutes from the land. My mother helped me load the car. She was cheerful about it in the way she was cheerful about things she'd decided to reframe as victories. Amanda's condo was finished by then. It was beautiful. She sent photos. I sent back a heart emoji because I meant it. My father had his first health scare in the third year. It was a heart issue. Not a heart attack exactly, but a warning. Stent procedure, 2 nights in a hospital, a new prescription regimen, and a list of dietary changes. I drove up to Knoxville the day I heard and sat in the waiting room for 4 hours. My mother was there. Amanda drove up from Nashville. Derek called from Portland, where he'd moved after passing the bar. In the waiting room, my mother said to me, not unkindly, "He's been worried about you, you know." He doesn't say it, but he is. "I'm fine," I said. "I know you think you are." I didn't have the energy to argue. I just watched the door. My father came through fine. I visited him 3 times during his recovery. On the second visit, he asked me about the land, how it was going, what I'd planted for fall, whether the creek had given me any trouble after the late summer rains. I sat next to his recliner and talked about cover crops and soil biology for 45 minutes. He listened to every word. At one point, he closed his eyes and I thought he'd fallen asleep, but then he said without opening them, "You figured it out." "I'm still figuring it out," I said. "Yeah," he said. "That's what I mean." My sister came to see the property on a Tuesday afternoon in October, 2.5 years into the operation. She hadn't told me she was coming. I found out because I saw her car pulling up to the access road while I was harvesting winter squash in the south field. She got out and looked around. She was wearing good boots, which surprised me. She walked the edge of the field without saying anything for a while, looking at the beds, the small hoop house I'd built to extend the season, the compost area, the creek. "This is yours?" she said finally. "Dad's, technically. I lease it from him," she nodded. Then she said, "How much do you make?" I told her. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Huh," and got back in her car. That night I got a text from my mother. "Your father and I would love to have everyone for Thanksgiving this year. A real family dinner. We'd love to see what you've built too if you want to bring photos." I stared at that text for a long time. Amanda called the following Sunday. She said she'd talked to my mother and thought it would be nice if we all came out to see the property sometime. She said it casually, the way you see things you've rehearsed into casualness. I told her that would be fine. She said she was proud of me. I said thank you and meant it, but I also recognized that she was saying it now, in this moment, after the October visit, and not any of the moments before it. I didn't say that part out loud. I just filed it. My father passed away in the spring. It was unexpected. A second cardiac event. Fast in the early morning. My mother called me at 5:47 a.m. I was already awake. I drove to Knoxville in the dark without remembering most of the drive. The weeks after were the kind of blur that people describe and you always think you understand until you're in it. There were casseroles and phone calls and paperwork and my mother holding herself together through sheer force of character, which I'd always respected about her even when I didn't like her. The will reading was 3 weeks after the funeral, My father had changed his will 8 months before his death. None of us knew. The attorney, a quiet man in his 60s, sat at his conference table and read through it in that particular even voice attorneys use that strips all emotion from language. And I sat there listening, and about halfway through, I felt my hands go still in my lap. My father left the 7-acre property to me, not to the family, not shared. To me, specifically, by name, with a note in the document that said, "Claire has earned it." He also left a letter in a sealed envelope addressed to me. The attorney handed it across the table. I didn't open it there. My mother did not say anything at first. Amanda looked at her phone. Derek, on a video call from Portland, said, Wait, isn't that the property with the—" and then stopped. On the drive home, Amanda called me. She said, "I'm sure he didn't mean for it to seem like he meant it exactly how it says," I said, not unkindly. "Just clearly, Mommy's upset. I know, she thinks it's not fair." I pulled into a gas station and sat there with the engine running. The trees along the road were just starting to bud. Everything was that particular pale green that only exists for about 2 weeks in early spring. "Amanda," I said, "your condo is paid for. Derek's law school loans were covered. I got $50 a month in land rent and a folding table I bought for $40 to sell vegetables on Saturday mornings. And I built something out of it. That's what happened. That's the whole story." She didn't say anything for a moment. "Then I know." "Okay," I said. "I know," she said again, quieter this time. And that was the most she'd ever given me, and I accepted it. I opened the letter that night at my kitchen table. My father's handwriting was small and precise, the way he did everything. He'd written it on 2 pages of yellow legal pad, the kind he kept in the desk in his garage. He said he'd been watching the land change for 2 years. He said he drove out there sometimes on Saturday mornings without telling anyone, the way he always had, and walked around and looked at what I'd built. He said he watched the beds get longer and the hoop house go up and the CSA sign appear at the end of the access road. And he said every time he saw it, he thought about that afternoon in February when I'd shown up with a notepad and asked him if I could try something. He said, "You never asked for anything except a chance. That's rarer than people think." He said he was sorry for the years when he'd been quiet when he shouldn't have been. He said he told himself he was staying out of it, letting things settle, keeping the peace, the way men like him told themselves a lot of things that were really just excuses for not being braver. He said he wanted me to know that he'd never believed what my mother said about me. Not the failure part, not any of it. He said, "I know you would have been fine without the land, but I wanted you to have it anyway. Some things should go to the person who understood them." I sat at my table for a long time after I finished reading. The apartment was quiet. Outside, a dog was barking somewhere down the street. The refrigerator hummed. I didn't cry. I'd done my crying in the dark weeks, the earlier ones. This was something else. Something more like the feeling of a window opening, like air coming into a room that had been closed for a long time. Thanksgiving came. My mother had organized it at her house, which was what she always did, which was her way of feeling in control of things when things felt uncontrolled. I brought 2 cases of jarred goods I'd put up that fall, tomatoes, pickled green beans, herb jelly, and set them on the kitchen counter without making a thing of it. My mother looked at them and said, "How lovely!" And she said it in a way that meant more than she intended. We ate. Derek and his girlfriend joined on video from Portland. Amanda talked about a promotion she was up for. My mother talked about her book club. I talked, when asked, about the upcoming spring planting and the 2 new restaurant accounts I'd signed in November. A farm-to-table place in downtown Knoxville and a small Italian spot in Maryville that wanted local tomatoes and herbs. At one point, after dessert, my mother looked at me across the table and said, "Your father would be proud." I thought about the letter. I thought about all the Saturday mornings I hadn't known about. Him walking the property alone, watching. "I know," I said. She nodded once. Something passed between us. Not forgiveness exactly, because I wasn't sure what there was to forgive, and I wasn't sure she'd asked. something more like acknowledgement. Two people who had been at odds about what I was worth, finally, quietly, landing on the same answer. I drove home that night with the windows cracked, even though it was cold. The land was 12 miles away in the dark, and I knew every inch of it. The south field, the creek, the pale green of early spring coming, the rows I would plant in March. It had started as something my mother called a waste, something my neighbors called a hobby, something I had no words for except the way it felt when my hands were in the soil and the world made sense. Now it was mine, not because it had been given to me, because I had shown up for it every week in every season with a folding table and $40 and the stubborn, quiet belief that some things look like nothing until you know what to do with them. My father knew. Now so does everyone else. I've thought a lot about what made the difference. Not the land. The land was just dirt and creek water and dead winter grass when I started. Not the money because I didn't have any. Not luck because I had a string of it that went in the wrong direction for a long time before it went anywhere useful. What made the difference was that I kept showing up when there was no reason to. That sounds simple. It isn't. Showing up when people are watching, when there's applause, when someone is keeping score, that's easy. Anyone can do that. The hard thing is showing up at 6 in the morning on a February Saturday when the ground is frozen and your hands are cold and nobody knows you're there and nobody cares. The hard thing is doing the work when the only person who will ever know you did it is you. I failed at the bakery. I'm not ashamed of that anymore, but it took me a while to get there. For a long time, I let my mother's silence about it mean what she wanted it to mean, that I had proven something about myself, confirmed some suspicion she'd always had. I let that sit on me. And then one day, standing in a field I'd amended with my own hands, I realized that the bakery failing didn't tell the story she thought it told. It told the story of someone who tried before she was ready, learned what she needed to learn, and went back and tried again with better information. That's not failure. That's just the first chapter. My mother isn't a villain. I want to be clear about that because it would be easier if she were. She's a woman who valued security, who'd watched people struggle and decided that the safest thing was to stay inside the lines. She thought giving Amanda money for a condo was an investment because she understood condos. She thought my 7 acres of Tennessee scrubland was a gamble because she didn't understand what I was doing. That's not cruelty. That's just the limit of what someone can see from where they're standing. My father saw further. He didn't say much about it, that was his way, but he drove out there alone on Saturday mornings and walked the land and watched it change, and he knew. He knew before I did. Maybe, what the thing I was building actually was. And when he put my name on that deed with the note that said she has earned it, he wasn't giving me a gift. He was making a record. He was saying, I saw this. It was real. It counted. That's what I think about when people ask me what the lesson is. There isn't one lesson, really. There's just the slow understanding that your choices accumulate. Every time you show up when you don't feel like it, every time you do the harder right thing instead of the easier, comfortable one, every time you resist the pull to give up just because someone else has decided the outcome already, it adds up. Not immediately. Not in a way you can graph or measure. But it adds up. And eventually, the ground you've been working shows you what it's been holding. Amanda came to visit the farm last spring. We walked the south field together, and she was quiet in the same way my father used to be quiet. And I thought, she's seeing it now too. That was enough for me. I'm not interested in being right. I'm interested in being right. I'm interested in what grows.